you better really be connected to your neighbors. You really have to start to know the people around you and be connected to them in a peer-to-peer way, because you don't know when you're going to need help. And it turns out supporting other people is probably one of the best things you can do to give your life joy.
Welcome to Entangled Futures with Lucas Tawil, where we explore mutuality and conversations towards a world that works for everyone.
This episode is brought to you by the Holochain Foundation. Holochain is creating technology that allows people to team up, share information, and solve their own problems without needing a middleman. Creating carriers that cannot be captured, Holochain enables privacy and holds space for innovation and mutuality. I first came across the project in 2018 during my journey into participative culture with Unspiral. My good friend Haley Cooper-Ryder pointed me to the green paper, and I was blown away by the vision of a local-first, decentralized internet. I worked for 5 years on the project and feel very grateful for the support with the show. Enjoy it. Today we welcome Sara Horowitz, founder of Freelancers Union and author of the book Mutualism, Building the New Economy from the Ground Up. A breeze of fresh air in a time of suffocating narratives and wealth concentration policies. Sara Horowitz's book and practice give new life to powerful ideas on collective action, self-determination, economic systems, and labor. Sara's new initiative is the Mutualist Society, a space for peer-to-peer cross-pollination on ideas on mutual aid, mutualism, and building from the ground up. I'm so stoked to have you here, Sara. Thanks for joining.
Oh, thank you so much. Really happy to be here. Thank you.
Sara, could you share your journey into mutualism for us to get started?
Yeah. No, I'd love to. I really love hearing when people talk about their families or their backgrounds, and it's usually the feeling of being really human. So I would say the thing that really has surprised me about my mutualist journey is that it really did start with my grandparents' generation. And my grandfather was a vice president of a union called the International Ladies Garment Workers Union. And that union really was this completely entrepreneurial endeavor. So mostly women workers paid their union dues. The union acted incredible entrepreneurial capitalists except for the working class. And they built housing and insurance and all sorts of things that workers needed that still exist today. I was raised to go to my grandma's house, which was a union cooperative, and I didn't think anything was special about it. It's just where we went for family get-togethers. And then my father was a union-side labor lawyer, and then I became a union organizer. And I'd say as I started to really build and think about it, I never forgot the 1920s trade union movement and what they did and how they had this vision of starting with one thing that workers needed and just kept building and building, and it was a viable economic strategy. And I'd say that was probably my real base frame that really has guided my life, but I don't think I really thought about it until I started really building up the Freelancers Union.
Sara, on your book, Workers Looking After Themselves and Building a Safety Net has central stage. How important is a safety net? Why is it so crucial?
You know, there's really not just one safety net. I think we now think about a government provided safety net, and that feels like a safety net. But actually, what we really have to start realizing is that we build many safety nets, and that we have to see that it's not all either government or charity or a market that we buy, like an insurance policy. Especially when we look at what's happening with climate change, you better really be connected to your neighbors. You really have to start to know the people around you and be connected to them in a peer-to-peer way, because you don't know when you're going to need help. And it turns out supporting other people is probably one of the best things you can do to give your life joy. And so really we need to reconceptualize this framework. And I would say that is probably the thing I realized from the Freelancers Union to starting to build the Mutualist Society is, let's just get started with this peer-to-peer, and let's just move fast to realizing that is going to be where we have to be right now.
Sara, on your book, you mention a plaque in the Rochdale Pioneer Museum in England, the birthplace of the modern cooperative movement, that puts it so nicely that the cooperative ideal is as old as human society. It is the idea of conflict and competition as a principle of economic progress that is new. This really struck me reading the book and realizing how nourishing and regenerative it is to be in mutuality. And it seems we lost that, we forgot that on the social fabric.
Yes. You know, if I were describing how much we've lost that in our conceptualization, the way we think of business is the cherry on the icing on the cake. That we're just going to engage in these transactions and we're going to do really fast things really easily. We're going to do one thing. It's going to be homogenous. We're going to take it to scale. Everything will have big box store uniformity. And boy, won't we get rich and have all the consumer items we could possibly need. You and I would probably not even find that conceptualization to be attractive on its face. But the truth is that that kind of economic activity doesn't happen unless human beings have a lot of trust in one another to be creating all sorts of exchanges. And because we haven't been doing that, we see that we're moving toward this kind of growth that isn't actually helping people, right? It's not the kind of growth that makes people healthier, freer, richer. We're seeing concentrations of capital. And that's why I think we actually really have to say there's a way to build markets that are coherent, that actually sustain communities, that aren't about rapacious capitalism, but we have to think about it mutualistically. It's neither the government in a centralized way, though there's an important role of government to build mutualism, nor is it an unfettered free market, though markets are important. Mutualism isn't a third way argument. It's a different way of looking at the world.
Sara, I've been in the space of collective decision-making and participative culture for 2 decades. Reading your book, I realized I'm actually a mutualist, noticing the convergence the name carries, encompassing mutual aid, care, and collective organizing was thrilling and humbling. The book dramatically increased my understanding of what mutualism is and how it spans both across the political divide and time, from modern cooperatives in the Basque Country to religious communities in the early settlement of the United States. What is mutualism, and when did you realize you were a mutualist?
It's a great question, and I think the easiest way to understand mutualism is to really focus on the 3 principles, because it lets you decide what you think is mutualist and what is important to you. But it really is a frame of understanding. So number 1, there has to be a group, a solidaristic group. Are you in it? Is it a group of workers who are organizing a factory? Is it a cooperative of people who are purchasing together? But you know who's in and who isn't in. Is it your faith community? And that is a boundaried community based on solidarity. The second, which is often forgotten, is it has to have an economic mechanism. But an economic mechanism can be dues, it can be services, it can be alternative currency, it can be anything that enables people to have an exchange, barter. But you must have something of value that you're exchanging, because it's not charity, it's peer-to-peer. And whatever value you generate has to go back to that community. This isn't like an impact investment where the revenues leave the community and go elsewhere. They must go back. So I think a really great example is a strike fund in a union. Your dues go to that strike fund. You don't know if you're going to be the workers who are going to get to use that or not. But you do that because you're paying it forward. And the third is that time horizon, that is recognizing you got here because other people helped you. You are asked to make a contribution, and that has to go to future generations. And we could talk about this. Many models, economic models, do that. And that generational exchange is what makes those communities that have the flattest distribution of income sustainable. And I think that's very interesting. But those are the three principles. It's kind of a funny thing, but I think I always thought like this. But it's really in the last 15 years that I realize how politically homeless I've become, because the left really focuses on centralized government and anything that's good must come from government. And the right thinks everything must be an unfettered market. And I don't think that anymore. I believe in government. I believe we need a really decentralized strategy. I think human beings are pretty smart about what they need, and we should be thinking about how to make things decentralized so communities have a larger say. But I don't think it's just a feel-good thing. I think it's like tough economics, like revenues have to exceed expenses, and people have to be grown-ups, and we have to give them reason to be grown-ups. But like, let's get back to that, you know?
As I hear you, one of the phrases of your book come back to me. I'm sorry if I'm being too much of a fan. I really love the book. So you speak of building institutions that are supported on the binding energy of reciprocal obligations. And this was like, oh my God, of course. How does reciprocal obligations work as the motor of this structure?
Well, you know, it's reciprocality, and it's also over generations. So I want to give you an example. If you look at the cooperative movements around Quebec, the Basque region of Spain, and northern Italy, they all have these models, and the capital system is called indivisible reserves. And so it is an acknowledgement of the current generation that has to pay 3% of revenues to a central fund, and that central fund is used to be affordable and good capital for the next generation of cooperatives that have a business model and want to be born. So they don't have to go out to the free market where they would never be able to be sustainable, because they'd have to either pay back too much or the equity amount wouldn't work. But the reason that people give that is because what the cooperatives that they're working at this moment got their capital from the past generation. So you don't know maybe people from the past, and maybe you won't know people from the future, but the economic model is actually doing that work, and each generation is sustaining it. Another interesting story, the Green Bay Packers are a big football team in America. And like a lot of soccer teams across the world, which are owned by fans, America actually had that model too in football. And so fans used to own it. But in the 1920s, the American Football League was formed, and it said, oh yeah, no, that's over. Only one rich guy is going to own football now, maybe a handful, but no more than a handful. But here were the Green Bay Packers, and they said, we want to be grandfathered in. So they said, okay, you're the only ones. So Green Bay Packers A big football team in America is owned by its fans, and the fans have funded new stadiums. They pay the salaries of the players and staff. And so the message of all of this is these are models that work, right? We just have to set up these markets so that they encourage it and sustain it over time. And that's what I think people forget, because they think the market works like a hurricane and a weather system. It doesn't. The markets are created by human beings. We decide. Powerful people make decisions about how they'll be maintained. That's the work for now, is to get the vision to explain that we can build something different.
I really want to get into patient capital with you in models that point us into that direction. But I feel we better build a bit more of a foundation before we get into the... So, Sara, in the first part of your book, you share how your family story is one and the same as the story of how workers organized to create their safety nets in the United States. What can we learn from the past to build our own safety nets?
Well, you know, in the book I talk about, in my neighborhood in Brooklyn, New York, my parents were in a babysitting cooperative. And again, what I think is really important is people form these not because they wanted to be able to tell people they were in babysitting co-ops, but because they wanted to go out and they couldn't afford to pay people to take care of their kids. So they literally used like a monopoly money. The families got together. I remember my mother kept the monopoly money in like a legal white envelope in the chest of drawers in our hallway. And when the envelope was empty, she would call around to see if anybody needed babysitting, which other people did too. But what happened as a result was, I guess the good news for them is they got to go out. But the parents and the children, all the parents had babysat for all these different children. So everybody in the neighborhood really knew each other because there was this incredible cross-pollination of everybody getting some time together. And that's what I think is so important here, is we can start to realize that we think we're doing something economic, but actually what we're doing is we're ordering society. I think a lot about the problems facing a lot of developing countries in particular of obesity and diabetes. And it strikes me how we don't have a coherent policy for community gardens and training people to do basic visiting of one another. And you could imagine how you could set these institutions up. No one's going to get rich from doing them, but you don't need that. You just need revenues to exceed expenses. So why not create a generation that starts to create these kinds of organizations and institutions? I have a lot more faith that that's going to work than some like public service announcement on your radio station about being lonely. You know, if I hear one more stupid lonely story, like it's really got to be that you find a way. I think a lot about mayors. I don't get why mayors don't, they have staff, why don't they mutualistly map their faith, their cooperatives, their credit unions, all of them together, invite them to a meal and say, like, what should we be doing together? And we have this space, use the space. You have ideas, here's the mutualist space, and start telling me what we should be doing and helping to set up what's called like a sandbox for new ideas. And let's see if we can, if it's a housing thing, get some of the housing budget to support that innovation. Like, this is not hard. It's that we have to see it and have the will and be open to experimentation. And then people have to not be pissed off when experiments don't work. And that is on us to change ourselves and stop being critiquers in chief and start moving into being builders and cutting each other a little bit more slack.
I notice a huge transactional vein in modern life, and the relational getting weaker and weaker. And most of us don't realize why are we feeling dread or why we are unhealthy. The transactional is limited, right? Is arithmetic. Relational is exponential. Like relationships create life, right? You get kids. Transactions don't do that. Sara, you have yourself built a successful modern mutualist organization with the Freelancers Union. What problem did you choose to solve, and why was that choice important?
You know, I love that question because now, in retrospect, when I say, oh, well, freelancers needed health insurance, it's kind of like, duh. But I think what was really important was I didn't go into organizing freelancers with that thought. First, I was a union-side labor lawyer that was misclassified as an independent contractor. And I was like, that is really messed up. We should be able to unionize, but freelancers are independent contractors, and therefore we're not and can't form unions in the traditional industrial sense. So I started talking to freelancers anywhere I could and wanted to hear, what was going on. And that's an emergent process, which is 100% mutualistic, right? Like, you don't go in because some management consultant that you've paid an enormous amount does the interviews. No, you go and talk to people and find out what is going on. So it turned out that it was insurance. And at first I was like, oh my God, this is a disaster. Like, who cares about insurance? But it turned out that that was the string that really showed how in the US, the New Deal, our big social policy, was unraveling for huge parts of the population. And so I literally just started to learn insurance. And that enabled us to keep working at different levels. So first we got the crappiest thing that we could get, but it was an improvement over nothing. And then we kept evolving. And then really it was having imagination to design a system that hadn't existed before. We created the first portable benefits network, actually. And to people who know about crypto, I will just say that in 2008, we launched our insurance company, and freelancers would have to verify that they were real freelancers. And I kid you not, they would have to download a form called the proof of work form to verify their work, that they went from job to job and project to project. And that is what mutualism is that we started in the traditional business way. We had to succeed at incremental levels until we could take off with a different vision. And I think that was probably one of the most important lessons. And you and I have discussed this. I think that when you were referencing this transactional way, I think we get ourselves into another trap, which is really at this moment in time, we think anything we build must have funding, it must be big, it must have impact, we must start at a level of just sheer force. And I don't know anybody who's built anything like that. From when you start small. My new tagline is, you have to have the courage to be small. And value what you're doing and build from there and build your networks and build your ecosystem. Mondragon started that way. Emilia-Romagna, the labor movement. The labor movement in America was started when the United Mine Workers of America president got into a car and drove to the mines and said, President Roosevelt wants you to form a union. Nobody knew what it was. They made it up. People can't imagine that. 13 million people are in unions in America and much more in many other places. Everybody has an origin story, always.
Sara, having had created a union-owned business with $100 million a year in revenues leaves no doubt on your capacity for ambitious undertakings. You inspired me with your bold vision of a full-fledged mutualist ecosystem, especially on how practical and down-to-earth are your suggestions on how we get there. Could you share your vision and what are the structures we need to get there?
Yes. Well, I think the first thing It starts with a solidaristic community. It doesn't have to be in one place. It can be virtual, but you have to start with your solidaristic group. And if it doesn't exist, you make it up. I was just talking with somebody who's a veteran cooperative builder, and we were talking about how the first step often for funding is to have a house party and ask people to contribute. And then ask those people to be the first people in your network to start something on Kickstarter, right? Like, and it's not that you have to do those two things, but actually realize like that's okay if that's where you're starting. And then look around you for the other mutualists and go and talk to people and start to see what do they need? What do they want to do? And maybe they have a room. Maybe they have some resources. I don't mean resources like necessarily money. I mean, maybe they have a list. Maybe they can introduce you as somebody who's doing a project and help you brainstorm. Just start immediately network weaving. And then when you have something, another pattern that I've really seen, and I did this at the Freelancers Union, you build your group and then you keep building the next entities that you need. So we didn't start with insurance company. We just sold it in the beginning. But then we started our own technology company. Then we started a medical practice. And I've seen Molly Hempstreet in North Carolina in Industrial Threads, who started out with 2 employees and a sewing machine. And now in North Carolina, they've created a whole hub of cooperatives that's connected and have been able to really galvanize a lot of economic development funding, $64 million, into their small area in North Carolina. So what I think is happening is there's a layer that we don't have, which is the connecting of those new future-facing organizations, because they're building this in an environment that is so uphill. But I think we still have to start, and then we have to start bringing in the different elected officials and other leaders and other communities to make it so that we're not just building in isolation. And that really is the difference. So for instance, going back to the community gardens of growing vegetables, we're having a big crisis in the price of eggs right now in America. You know, I'm from Brooklyn, you know, I don't have chickens, but I bet you other people around Brooklyn have chickens. But forget about us in an urban area. You could start to talk to said mayor, or there's a lot of land. Start growing vegetables and start having people come together and then enjoy each other's company. Then have it become a farmer's market because there's a whole regional group of farmers around you. Start to find out what those issues are. This is just an organic way of doing it.
So when I hear of the building of a mutualistic ecosystem, I see a couple of pillars: the locally grounded mutualist organizations that need to be seeded and incentivized, a layer of government, as you put it on the book, that needs to nourish and enable that thing to grow. You also mentioned the training of the next generation of mutualists and capital. So we have those foundational points that need to grow together, right? You can't build one only without the others. Shall we go through them? You spoke of structures of patient capital in Mondragon, in the Basque Country, in Emilia-Romagna, in Italy, and in Canada. How do we shift the system to enable patient capital?
Yes. Well, I think that if a Silicon Valley Jozillionaire said, here, I'm creating this giant fund, I would say that will be the worst thing that could happen, because it would, again, create this kind of uniformity. Down the road, giant capital could be very helpful, but you'd be plugging it into a system. What would undoubtedly be catalytic is if it either came from donors or foundations or mayors or regional capital in tandem, creating funds that create fellowships. When people in the local community have an idea, they get plugged in. There are these fellowships that exist everywhere in the world that Ashoka, the nonprofit organization, started with social entrepreneurs, and they have many thousands across the world, Echoing Green and Schwab. We know how to do this. So the first is a call out to the people who have an idea. And the second is that you give them a small amount of capital to get them started. And then the third is that you watch and see how the field gets grown. And at each step, it's a vertical of funding, and you're watching where that is. Eventually, you're looking for bigger money. So let's say you're funding an ecosystem. But let's plant these seeds and let the seedlings grow. Let's not start, with the forest that has been around for 30 and 50 years. No, we're at seedling time. And that's okay. And people have to get over their own ego that it has to be something big and fancy, like enough already. And then you can start to see that. So what the message is not, let's just get a bunch of rich people to collect their money, right? Like, yeah, okay, that's great if people want to do that. But it's actually the call out to the people who are starting and supporting them. I'll give you another example. I think there's a group that does this already in the for-profit sector, and it's called Y Combinator in Silicon Valley. So Y Combinator, this is exactly what they do. They get a bunch of the founders who they think are great. They put them in a cohort each year. They train them so that they learn what every early stage group needs. And so by the time they come out of a 2-year program, all the big Silicon Valley funds want to invest, because who doesn't want a group of people that were picked, that are acculturated to what's about to happen, have a network that's interconnected so people can help each other, the other founders. And they then have a vertical. So here they have figured this out from the early stage all the way to maturity. They have a capital market. We here back in Mutualismville have this vertical that has about 1 million holes in it. And so that's why we have to start and just keep getting those holes patched. And the energy will start to make it happen, because people will be able to start articulating what they need next. But it won't happen if we don't start with these cohorts saying, I'm a mutualist, this is how my community is. This is what we're doing in mutual aid. This is what we're doing to build a cooperative or a faith community or a new kind of school. And then the capital can hear them because they have a track record. But we just have to be ready. And there are, to give you another example, foundations actually have these tools in the United States, something called program-related investments, that allow foundations to give like 1% and 2% loans, which you cannot get in the traditional market, and it comes out of their charitable pot. Like, they don't even lose money if the loan isn't repaid. But they've stopped investing, and worse, they no longer have staff who even know how to do it. Less than 2% even do it now. So they actually have the right tool, but it's because we've let this sector go. And I think as it's a sector that is from generation to generation, we have to understand that we stopped passing to this younger generation. They need to get the baton back in their hand, and that's our job.
Sara, what about the role of the government in this vision of a strong mutualistic system? The New Deal gave scale to the mutualist innovations created by the union movement in the United States. In Spain, Mondragon's exceptional results in the Basque Country has the support of the government. What can we learn from past successes of the government giving scale to mutualist innovations?
I think the first lesson is to not think that the story started with the government supporting them. The story started with the social movements and social organizations that told government what they needed to grow. And they had grown to such sufficient heft that the government, of course, would do it. So if you talk to the people in Mondragon, they will tell you that when Mondragon started, it was with Padre Arizmendi, and it was in a fascist moment, and they started very small and very locally with having nothing to do with the government. And then they built, and it took many decades before they then had a conversation with government about what they needed and what they needed to be separate. So I think that's number one. Number two, if somebody were an elected official or somebody who had some power in an area said, well, like, what should we be doing? You should be creating sandboxes. You should be creating a safe place for a group to just get started. They can't follow every regulation that's already out there. They can't do it the way the existing organizations are doing it. So you have to create some kind of zone as long as they're showing that they're mutualistic. So in other words, you don't want to have people who are coming in and just trying to make a quick buck get away from some regulation. But you do have to create that safe space. And then I think third, we should be looking at that government has things. It has buildings, it has infrastructure, it has real estate, it has land, and that should be for the mutualists to be able to come in and use, to be like Y Combinator and have a cohort. So every city should have a cohort. This could be started in high schools. This could be started as trades. This could be started in college. If you want it to happen, just ask people what they want changed in their area. What does the area need? What do they want to grow?
Sara, what can other mutualist organizations learn from how religious organizations carved a niche in the tax code that enabled them to look after their communities with hospitals, schools, and orphanages?
Yeah. Well, you know, what's interesting is if you look at, let's say, the Catholic Church, so many religions are very old. They were providing, before there was a tax code written for their own communities. And so they had the ability to be at the table to say, we need an exemption. But, you know, I'm Jewish, and one of the things that I'm always impressed about with Judaism is we're kind of hard-coded to organize, right? So we have to get started something that's called a minyan, which means, used to mean 10 men, but 10 people, 10 Jews have to be there in order to have decision-making. And then we had to have a place to bury our dead, and we had to have ritual slaughter for animals. So you get it, it's like, here's the group and here's your first two activities. So we kind of taught people how to organize. The Catholic Church started taking care of people. The Muslim tradition has a tradition of tithing. So these actually make complete sense that they had this ability to understand that there will be new generations. They have to learn how they're going to organize for the future. And then they institutionalized so that they could survive and get a space that's carved out. So you don't have a government religion. That's the same with the trade union movement in America's New Deal. The government made it illegal for companies to have unions and for government to have unions. Only unions can be unions. And that's the danger right now. And this is, again, the left and the right keep getting into the mutualist lane. So you have these for-profits that are like B Corps and Impact, and they use these words that are like magnificent, and you would think by their words that they will transform things, but they've just completely confused us to seeing that we don't have a mutualist sector of the three principles of the solidaristic group, the economic mechanism, and the long-term time horizon. It's wonderful when businesses want to be wonderful, but that's different. And it's the same for government. We often think, oh, so-and-so is doing something wonderful. That group is so wonderful. Government should do it in their place, because then we could give it to everybody. No, that's what kills it. I'll just give you another example. You see this all the time with the disaster recovery around climate change right now. Everywhere in the world, when something terrible happens, human beings immediately, in a kind of Jungian, wired way, start to help each other. They have to. People need medicine, they need food, they are ill, and if everybody's just sitting there just doing their own thing, everybody would suffer and die. So people get together and immediately have this organization. The first thing in the United States that we do after people have built this incredible mutual aid apparatus using technology and setting up networks and phone chains and everything is FEMA comes along, which is our disaster government program, and says, that's great. What you've done is wonderful. All you people are wonderful. Go you. They then take it over and make it a government job. And then they outsource it to the for-profit sector to do all the tasks that have been done. So why is that bad? Because if we had the patience to start to create the technology that was open source, we could say, okay, the first thing we're going to do is show you how to start to plug in to the same pattern of the people who had 3 disasters before you. You're going to need this, you're going to need that, you're going to need a team leader. And then what if after this was a great way for the community to get organized, that whole infrastructure got codified? And we said, now we can do the next thing. What else does the community need after the crisis? And then it's a way to govern ourselves because we've now shown how we're actually structured. But when you come in and you get us into this homogenous, big capital, big way uniformity, then now people are lonely. They're alienated. They're isolated. And that's not where we want to be.
And you're not replenishing and nourishing the nascent mutualist experiment, I see. Yeah. Sara, how is scale in mutualist ecosystems different from scale in capitalist economies?
So I think there really is scale. It's not like that this is going to just be some little quaint and cute thing. Like that, the problems of the world are really complicated. Logistics are global in many ways. But what it does is it says that this sector doesn't replace government. This sector doesn't replace markets or for-profit businesses. It stands connected to them and makes it so that there's a place that helps to have human beings be able to flourish. So the scale of a mutualist sector starts where people are incredibly connected in their local community or in their solidaristic group. So you could imagine it's like mycelial networks. It's ways that people start to see that by being connected, they'll do better. I'll give you an example. If one small community is buying something that the community needs, if it connects with 100 communities and has 10 times the people, they're able to get more at a lower rate. Or, give an example of another mutualist organization, First Book. First Book is an organization, a nonprofit, that 50% of their revenues come from a marketplace they own, where they get books to kids who need them. So very early on, they were getting whatever the publishers were giving them. But once they could connect all these kids together, they started saying back to the publishers, you need to get books that look like the kids who are reading, that are reflecting the issues that are going on in their lives. So that's what mutualism does. It actually is a feedback loop. People often read Fukuyama's book, which is The End of History. But they don't read this other book that I had to get used on eBay, which is called Trust. So here, this pretty conservative guy at Stanford, who's known for many neoliberal policies, realized that you don't have any successful market if you don't have people who trust one another. And trust happens in a sophisticated way through mutualist organization. That's why there's a crisis of democracy, because we don't have associations, we don't have organizations, we haven't learned how to be with people we don't like. We're human. If we all need something, we're not going to like each other sometimes, often. If you have people you love, you argue with them. So what it does is it teaches people civic skills, not just setting an agenda, not just running a meeting, but like, I can't stand that person. Well, we better figure out, like, it doesn't mean we're going to like each other, but we've got to get along enough to get this bigger thing done. And I think that anybody who's experienced that in life knows that's the true fulfillment, right? Of that person I couldn't stand, I got something done, we had to work it out together. That's what mutualism does every day.
Yeah, on your book, you carefully warn romantics that the mutualist period in the early 20th century was no utopia. Members had to work out their issues among themselves, and for a long time they did. In the process, they became skilled and robust citizens. Where can people who want to help find out more on how to flex our mutualist muscles go?
Yeah, well, first of all, you can come to the Mutualist Society .net, and we have peer-to-peer classes on Mutualism 101, Mutualist Tech Infrastructure, Mutualist Process. And so that's the beginning of cross-pollination, but you don't need us. You could go in your local community and just start by going to your faith community or a faith community that you're interested in, or going to your local food cooperative and joining it, or starting a book group, or starting something that enables you to be with people that you all decide. What it isn't is going on social media and liking somebody. Like, turn off the computer and just meet with people, or use technology so that you're creating a group. So just a little simple thing. You can say you want to get together and talk about something that's happening in your local community, whatever the issue is. Then you can start to use social media and say, this is where we're meeting. But when people come to that meeting, do not use social media. Use a Google Doc and just keep track. And get off these group platforms, because they're not building solidarity. They're just keeping everybody as individuals, and they're the ones who are making the money. And then you'll go from there. And then you'll tell me what you're using, and we'll have a bigger conversation, and we'll start to maybe use Holochain. And start to really think about, like, how do we have something that actually works? The problem is not that it doesn't exist. It's that we don't know how to use this in a coherent way. But not to worry, we'll start.
Sara, you mentioned you heard this question many times. Here it goes again. Is mutualism just another word for communism or socialism?
You know, I think we're so fearful that it takes over logic. Communism and socialism are centralized systems. There's a uniformity and an expectation that government decides everything. Mutualism is the antidote to that. It says that individuals need to come together and not lose their individuality, actually. You never are told. If you're in a group where somebody tells you what we think, like, run. Because what you have to be is persuaded. It has to make sense. It can't fail the common sense test. Do you need to join a food co-op because food prices are less expensive? Do you need a community garden because there's a way to have fresh vegetables? Do you need this thing because you will only do better if the group does better? If that math doesn't work, it's not mutualist. So this isn't brainwashing. Don't check your brain at the, mutualist door. You should be thinking and critical, but you should be a builder, and you should be forgiving and loving. That's really what this is about, is forgiving and loving, because this is a hard time. We're going to make a ton of mistakes. We are going to have to leave our ego, and we all have big egos. That's the nature of being human. But we have to check ourselves, because we have to be figuring things out. This isn't a time of pat answers. It's a time of good questions.
Yeah, unusual times call for unusual alliances, right? Today, the richest 1% have more wealth than the bottom 95% of the world population put together.
You know, the thing that I find alarming is that not even 1%, the 1% of the 1% are planning their exit from planet Earth. You know, they're either buying land or they're planning to go to another planet. Meanwhile, they're giving us nice long lectures from both the left and the right about how we're supposed to lead our lives and telling us, you know, don't think too much, you just do what we say. But meanwhile, the rest of us have to come up with ways to flourish and to survive. And that has to be a more collective response. And that's just the truth. Because we're not going anywhere to Mars, and we're not buying municipalities and islands. You know, we're not talking about longevity. We're actually, meanwhile, down here in the real world, talking about affordable eggs. So let's be clear about who we're listening to. And that's why I think loving and forgiving is actually the antidote, because that will guide you for the things that are productive. And I can assure you that you will be connected to people you don't agree with and you are surprised by. That's how you know it's a success.
Sara, what are the unusual alliances you see ripe for us to explore in these gloomy times?
Well, you know, I kind of feel like this does feel like gloomy times, but so many times have felt like gloomy times, you know? And I think it's really important to remember that, you know, our parents and their parents and their parents, like every generation had horrors and scary things that they were confronted by. But I would say, like, really starting to realize that people that are not in the who are super wealthy or super poor actually have a lot in common, especially people who work, you know? And that, I think, has been the big travesty, that workers have been separated a lot by the policies of the left and the right. And I think that it is realizing that we have to figure out how to send our kids to schools, and not schools that teach them to work in factories, but to let them be little human beings that are curious and imaginative. We need to have food that we enjoy, that's good for us. You know, I think those are the kinds of things that we have to be thinking about. And the things that we think are the hot button issues, like, So, like, let's have a little space for who we want to spend time with, and be, again, forgiving.
Sara, self-determination appears to be central in people solving their own problems. What have you learned on how to keep your self-determination alive during the storms in your journey?
Well, you know, I think that self-determination, to me, is really finding your group. Right, so it's actually not an individualistic thing. It's so, not to say it's an individual orientation, but finding your people. So when I wrote The Mutualist, Building the Next Economy from the Ground Up, I felt like the first thing I had to do was to try to gather mutualists, because we were all over the place, to start to have a place where we don't have to go to everybody else's conversation, but we could just have that conversation, but be heterodox. So there's no one way to be. There's, like, people can disagree, and they should disagree, but we should have an orientation around this. And then for me personally, you know, it's a question of faith. And I really believe in that. And I really believe in connecting to something greater than yourself, and realizing you're here but a moment in time, and people came before you and people will come after you. You don't have to succeed at the task at hand, but you may not desist from, as I would say, trying your best. So get off the scale and all these things and bigness and impressiveness, and just do what you can do and be okay with that. Forgive yourself. Love yourself. there's a lot to do. Like, just stop listening to like the media that make money if you come to them and click. We're all addicted to it, and we all know we are listening too much. Turn it off and just start to find your people.
Wow. Yeah. Extremely inspired. I'll see you in the Mutualist Society.
Hey, listen, let's begin. That's the phase right now. We are all beginners, and that's like the most exciting time, right?
Sara, that's been an exceptional experience. I really appreciate your time and the inspiration you bring. I'm looking forward to more conversations in the future. Hope we can sit together again and see how the progress of the society is going and hearing more from you.
And thank you so much. Really, it's been a great delight.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Thanks for joining us at Entangled Futures. Subscribe to our channel for more conversations on mutuality towards a world that works for all.